Skullface's goal was revenge against those who'd used language to subjugate people.
Torn from my elders, I was made to speak their language. With each new post, my masters changed, along with the words they made me speak. Words are peculiar.
Those corrupting a people's identity by forcing a new tongue on them. Those using the power of language to control information.
That's why we must depend on information control. People need an appropriate context for their lives.
We propose to do is not to control content, but to create context.
Create context?
Naturally, that set his sights on Zero. To Zero, English was simply the most convenient code.
Cipher plans to use its codes to control the world. They think they can. And the mother tongue of all those codes is hate. The word became flesh. The final parasite. It knows English. An English strain of the vocal parasite. I will exterminate the English language.
You planned this all along. Had your own agenda. All these years.
Major.
But to Skullface, English was a parasite.
A parasite upon this earth. That is what Zero is. As one born into this world, he's afflicted. I hold him responsible for killing my freedom. Killing all traces of my past. Killing any promise of a future.
In his eyes, the greatest symbiotic parasite the world's ever known isn't microbial. It's linguistic.
There were 3. Where's the other?
Very close to you.
Words are what keeps civilization, our world, alive. Free the world, not by taking men's lives, but by taking their tongues.
The world will need a new common tongue. A language of nukes. My metal ears shall be the thread by which all countries are bound together in equality. No words will be needed.
Words that kill.
In Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, the phrase "words can kill" refers to the power of language to shape concepts and images in people's minds, and how this power can often be used as a weapon, a means to control perceptions.
As of today, your name is Ahab. Your name is Ahab. Your name is forget everything. Forget your name. Forget your past.
Words are like a loaded gun. One bullet can cause a devastating impact, just as our choices of words can impact how somebody emotionally may respond, both negatively or positively.
Cipher's assassin. Finish her. She's one of the skulls. Hurry up and kill her.
I'm already a demon. That was not my kind of place anyway.
There's no need to kill her. Think carefully. This is your decision.
Stop this!
Killing her would be a
Now!
waste. Bring her back here. Boss. Boss.
Whilst words can't physically harm us, they can cause us to react with actions that may enlighten or cause destruction. Throughout history, words and language have created barriers between ideals and cultures all over the world, often leading to misunderstandings. Despite the common human existence we all share, words have played a role in changing perceptions and ideals. Or in fact, maybe in a better term, language.
Assume nothing. Report everything.
Since ancient times, every civilization's ruler has had the same idea. When people unite under one will, they become stronger than the sum of their parts. And the one will is the ruler's will. And what do rulers use to bring people together? Language.
You will be my eyes.
In linguistics, the term lingua franca, often cited in MGS5, historically referred to a pidgin, language used for trade and communication among speakers of different native tongues in the Mediterranean region, particularly from the 12th to the 19th centuries. Derived from the Italian phrase lingua franca, meaning the Frankish language, it was named after the Franks, a Western European group prominent in medieval trade. However, the concept of lingua franca predates English. The very same lingua franca that dominates the world as of today as a forced adopted linguistic amongst many cultures, and considered a parasitic form of communication as showcased by the main antagonist who wishes to destroy it.
Before he ever walked or cried, even before he was born, his mother tongue was English. He doesn't know the pain of losing his own language. Not yet.
It's this concept that relates to MGS5 through Mother Base, where soldiers from different backgrounds and languages are recruited, but still manage to communicate. This is achieved through the use of English as a true lingua franca, a secondary language. Much like how colonial powers or multinational operations required a common language for cohesion, in MGS5, this dynamic is reinforced by the emphasis on translation, devices, and language skills, symbolizing how language barriers are overcome in pursuit of shared purpose. For example, Big Boss, or rather Venom Snake, leverages the concept of lingua franca to strengthen his control and influence over the global landscape, particularly through the use of interpreters and the dominance of English. The lingua franca, a language that facilitates communication between people who do not share a native language, become an essential tool in his plan to create a new world order, both militarily and economically. Big Boss of his global ambitions relies on language as a form of control, by capturing interpreters and soldiers who speak their native language and training his soldiers to speak in English.
Часто вижу, у тебя свет допоздна.
Да, я всегда читаю газеты и журналы с той стороны. Я даже думаю по-английски.
Правда? Научи меня каким-нибудь клёвым выражением. На случай, если я вдруг встречу американца.
Хорошо, повторяй за мной. I spent last night with your girlfriend.
With your girlfriend.
Это было неплохо.
Правда? Что это значит?
Я друг твоего приятеля.
Ого, это действительно полезно. Любые мелочи могут помочь в этой холодной войне, да?
Точно. Эти слова могут спасти твою жизнь.
Ха-ха, может быть. В следующий раз ты должен научить меня еще чему-нибудь.
He essentially consolidates power. The soldiers in his armies who come from diverse linguistic backgrounds are not only able to communicate with one another using a common tongue, but also serve as a strategic asset. English, being the dominant global language, becomes the key tool for intelligence gathering and coordination. It's this multilingual approach that allows Big Boss forces to operate efficiently across various regions, from Afghanistan to Africa, even in areas where language barriers might otherwise impede communication. Mother Base is this perfect idea that is further showcased. Soldiers speak in English regardless of their native languages. As a unifying language for command and control, this choice reflects Big Boss's practical use of English as the lingua franca of his army. By adopting English as the primary language, Big Boss ensures that his troops can communicate seamlessly, share information, and coordinate operations. This isn't not really what only strengthens their internal cohesion, but definitely enhances their ability to gather intel, monitor global conflicts, and dominate the growing market of private military companies. The use of English becomes symbolic of his strategy to dominate the world stage, just as Major Zero. It's not just about military might, it's actually about controlling the flow of information and ensuring that his soldiers spread across different regions are united by a common language. that empowers them to act in a cohesive manner, to learn intel that is actually essential to their PMC. People see Big Boss as a hero, fighting for sovereignty and freedom, especially when it comes to preserving the linguistic identity of his people. He's often viewed as a champion of those oppressed by systems like Cipher.
What are you doing? Those weapons won't do any good! Get out of here before you're caught up in the blast and killed!
You risked your life to save our motherland!
Now it's our turn to defend your country!
You've given us a real reason to fight, Big Boss!
Other soldiers who share a deep hatred for Cipher tend to rally behind Big Boss because they share the same goal, to bring down a system built to keep them under control. But while Big Boss does use his soldiers as, in essence, as pawns in this fight, there's a reason behind it, because his goal is to create a common lingua franca, one that ensures his soldiers can understand their enemy and fight back effectively.
Everybody's gone their separate ways, but none of them are living their dream, because they're not fighting with you. Of course, I tried to headhunt as many of them as I could for Diamond Dogs. It was all a waste of time. They said they weren't interested without you to lead them, but now you're back. And everything's gonna change. We'll unite all private forces under you, transcending nations and economies. What is a nation? Just a patch of dirt. The bonds among us will surpass nations, and that's what'll put the world under our control. We'll establish a new kind of country, redefine the very concept of it. Even Cipher will be below us.
Cipher's goals, however, vastly differed from those of Big Boss. Zero sought to unify the world through information control, using the power of language and knowledge to dominate global politics and shape societies.
That the boss envisioned will finally become a reality. Race, tribal affiliations, national borders, even our faces will be irrelevant. The nature of communication itself will change, and it will make mankind whole again.
His vision was to create a world where his influence reigned supreme, and English, his mother tongue, became the dominant lingua franca. Cipher, who would become the Patriots by the 1990s, had complete control of the United States of America and its people, as Cipher the organisation was created with the intention to fulfill the ideal of a unified world that was envisioned by the legendary soldier, the Boss. Ensuring that control over information was central to power, words that control the subconscious.
America is a country of unity, a meeting of immigrants. Instead of simply assimilating, its citizens live alongside others. Their roots are varied, diverse. America's never been made up of just one people. But he tried to forge a single consciousness, for it and from it. The idea that every citizen will use free will to unite behind their country. Unilateralism like that can't be entrusted to any one individual. So the Major sought a system that used information, words, to control the subconscious.
We'll have to wake up your neighbor, too.
So he's not. He seems awake now.
No. Well, he's not actively conscious yet, at least.
He was a doctor, too.
In his mind, that past no longer exists. Your past is his past now. He's going to be your phantom, not some simple diversion. He'll act as the new Big Boss, and the act just isn't for Cipher.
The S3 is a system for controlling human will and consciousness.
You're good at this kind of thing. The best.
Everything you've done here has been scripted. A little exercise set up by us. You're all nothing but pawns, placed to create the perfect simulation.
I need you on this.
If it's in his best interests.
I assure you, it is. Look after Snake.
This is why we chose you. You accepted the fiction we've provided, obeyed our orders, and did everything you were told to.
Cipher's goals, however, vastly differed from those of Big Boss. Zero sought to unify the world through information control, using the power of language and knowledge to dominate global politics and really shape society. It's his vision that was to create a world where his influence reigned supreme and English, his mother tongue, become the dominant lingua franca, ensuring that control over information was central to power while silencing other lingua francas. Big Boss, on the other hand, didn't seek to control through information. He wanted to build a military nation for soldiers, one where they could live free from Cipher's reach. His plan was to create a place where soldiers could stand against Zero's control, a place where they'd have autonomy and purpose away from systems that sought to control them, ones that sought to take away minorities' voices and languages, even rendering cultural words completely obsolete. In means of changing their definitions or just completely removing their meanings.
If we lose the word Nijone, the images of our beautiful homeland would be washed away into oblivion along with it, just as Orwell indicated years ago. Cipher, being based in America, is pushing Englishization for this very reason. Suppose all 5 billion people on this planet come to read, speak, and think in English. Their wills could also be streamlined under English. Cipher's control would be all the easier. Economic governance would progress in leaps and bounds. The ethnic cleansing parasites would be a great aid in accomplishing this goal. There is no need to destroy every language besides English. All they need to do is weaken other dominant languages competing with it. Russian, Chinese, Arabic. If people know they risk their lives speaking such languages, they will flock to the lingua franca that is English.
It was this desire to protect soldiers and give them a voice, and the foundation of it all was Diamond Dogs during 1984, a very mercenary group that operated outside of the influence of any nation, striving to create its own quasi-nation, free from Cipher's grip. While Skullface and Big Boss, or rather Venom Snake's plans differed in their specifics, they both shared a common purpose. Not only have they had their identity and their voices stripped, they both shared a common disdain for Cipher's use of words and information to manipulate and control the subconscious mind, as we've seen through many characters throughout the series. Cipher's approach wasn't just about war, it was actually about shaping the minds of those who fought in it. Zero, as the big brother of the information world, wielded language like a weapon. Big Boss, as big brother of the battlefield, stood opposed to that, fighting to free soldiers from the same control.
Total information control. Big Brother Zero. And it'll happen before anyone even realizes. I don't like it. You're the big brother of the battlefield. You've earned a firm grip on the world's military power. But soon, Zero will have nations in his. He'll erase the Cold War, all war, from people's minds, and with it the world's borders.
Something that we see with the main antagonist of the series is actually something that Major Zero would not witness, but chiseled into a machine in a bunch of deviating AIs that would eventually take on the concept of Big Boss's war economy.
I probably won't be around. I'll be somewhere even you can't find me. A tombstone chiseled into the code of a machine. That is all I leave to mark my existence.
It's like the birth of a new life form. The system found a new way to propagate itself. War. The norms the Patriots had crafted for their unified state quickly became dependent on a single business, the war economy.
Skullface acquired most of Cipher's assets in his campaign in Afghanistan and Africa to pursue the Cleanser project, in which he hated, ironically, in order to perfect the English parasite strain. You could just say that he just wants to reverse cultural imperialism and suppression of smaller countries and equalize the world. but in idealistic terms makes him to be a hypocrite, just as the rulers who sought to colonialise power against language, so does he.
I'm taking your legs back!
This time, with Metal Gear Solid 5, the themes are a little different from previous games in the series. We're taking on some very heavy subjects, such as race and revenge.
With this, I'll rid the world of infestation. All men will breathe free again, reclaim their past, present, and future. This is no ethnic cleanser. It is a liberator. To free the world from zero. Let the world be.
Before E3 in 2013, Kojima announced that the overarching theme of Metal Gear Solid 5 would be about race and revenge. Previous entries contained similar themes like Gene, Metal Gear Solid, and Meme for Metal Gear Solid 2, and Scene for Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. And to quote Kojima, "For the past 25 years, all of my Metal Gear games have included a theme," Kojima said. "For MGS5, I wanted to write about race and revenge. This is ultimately where all of it leads to, past Metal Gears. I wanted to talk about the foundation for where all these battles and where hate comes from. Difference in culture, differences in race, the cycle of retaliation. It's ultimately caused by race."
I have no intention of hiding behind your technological veil, Major. I wear my broken visage, this skull, in the open, so that I may never forget what I've lost.
You. What are you?
The chain of retaliation is what will truly bind this world together as one.
The Phantom Pain dives deep into some of humanity's darkest chapters, and one of its most haunting themes is ethnic cleansing. This concept, chillingly mirrored in the real world, has shaped history through systematic atrocities. The Ottoman Empire targeted the Armenian population, branding them as a threat, leading to mass deportations and killings. Propaganda dehumanized Armenians, making their extermination seem justified. And under Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime, Jews, Romani people, and other minorities faced systematic annihilation. Nazi propaganda spread anti-Semitic ideology, portraying Jews as subhuman scapegoats for societal issues. And in 1994, the Rwandan genocide saw the Hutu majority label the Tutsi minority as cockroaches, inciting violence through radio broadcasts. Metal Gear weaves this into the tragic history of Skullface's origin, where he represents the cyclical nature of oppression and revenge. And genocide, not by taking a life, but taking a culture. As a child, Skullface witnessed unimaginable horrors. His life was shattered when the rapeseed oil factory where he and his parents worked was bombed by Allied forces during World War II.
Born in Hungary, more specifically northern Transylvania, after it reverted to Hungary from Romania. While he was young, the country allied with Germany as part of the Axis powers, but later during the war, it came under Soviet occupation. The Hungarians struggled for independence, but the Soviets came down. Hard. Just like he said, time and again the country was ruled by a foreign tongue. When he was a young boy, he lost his native language, the bedrock for any developing child. His country, his family, his face, his identity, everything was stolen from him.
Skullface was a product of the World Wars, a living testament to the devastation caused by nations vying for dominance through linguistic control, ethnic cleansing, and genocidal regimes. His own life was shaped by the brutal consequences of these ambitions. After Germany's collapse, the Soviets occupied northern Transylvania, which reverted to Hungary and later to Romania. This period was defined by unrelenting oppression and systematic attempts to erase identities, including that of Skullface and countless others who bore the weight of these atrocities worldwide. When the Soviet occupation of Romania began in 1944, following the Axis powers' defeat, the effects were both immediate and far-reaching. Political opponents were arrested, deported, or executed, as the Soviets dismantled any semblance of resistance. They installed a communist government, embedding their influence deeply into Romania's reconstruction. Stalinist policies reshaped the nation's economy through forced collectivization of agriculture and rapid industrialization, prioritizing control over sustainability. The cultural landscape wasn't spared either. Romanian artists and writers were expected to create works aligned with Soviet ideology. With Russian being aggressively pushed on as a second language, this linguistic domination wasn't just about communication, it was a tool to suppress individuality and impose control over a nation's identity. No doubt everything that Skullface hated. He most likely planned all of this at the beginning, because as a young man being a spy master for Soviet powers, he spent much of his time killing various people, those he harboured vengeance against for taking away his ability to speak his native tongue, including one of his prime targets, who was known as the Soviet leader, Joseph Stalin.
This Soviet spy hunt rocked the counter-intel world. Mysterious fatal illnesses, accidental deaths, drownings, people having strokes behind closed doors. Just like Stalin, no one knew who was behind it. But all you need to do was look for who had the motive. They were all taken out by a man without a face. And now we've got an idea of how he did it too. He'd gotten revenge for his people, but he wasn't finished.
Trojan horse is in!
But it wasn't such countries as the British Empire of colonialisms. Throughout history, the imposition of dominant language has often been used as a tool to assert control over conquered or colonised people, erasing native languages and the cultures they carry. For example, in Africa, colonial powers imposed European languages like French, English and Portuguese, often at the expense of rich linguistic traditions. For example, during the French colonization, the use of native languages was discouraged in education and governance, relegating them to informal contexts. And it was this suppression that disrupted cultural continuity, as language was a medium for transmitting histories, philosophies, and social norms. In Algeria, where French became entrenched, many people found themselves alienated from their native Arabic and Berber languages. Even after independence, the colonial languages often remained dominant in education and public life, reflecting the lasting scars of linguistic imperialism.
Where is Cipher? Where is Zero? I've never known choice. Where I was born, the language I speak. I've never had the freedom to choose for myself. But you, right now, are free.
The antagonist blames and envies Zero for retaining his own native language, sets his agenda, and Zero, who was following the philosophers, his predecessors' dreams of ethnically cleansing smaller nations, realizes with Parasite technology, they don't no longer need to target an entire race of people, but specific individuals.
The atomic bomb, rocket technology, the Cobra unit. And they amassed an enormous sum of money to fund these projects, enough to fight the war 5 times over. That wealth is the philosopher's legacy.
I do not know in detail how Cipher accomplished this, but clearly they have access to high-level genetic technologies. Skullface said it was the work of a genius woman scientist, and that the relative species in question was first discovered by a group once called the Philosophers.
As showcased through the FoxDie project, who is led by the DIA operative Richard Ames under the authority of Solidus, also under the orders of the Patriots. It was only up until Dr. Naomi Hunter who joined the project when the virus was successfully engineered.
Hey, so what's up? I've got a good friend in the Pentagon. Yeah? He's the one who told me about it. It looks like the DIA recently developed a new type of assassination weapon. An assassination weapon? Snake, have you ever heard of something called FoxDie? No. FoxDie. Liquid and the others were talking about it. Yeah. It's some kind of virus that targets specific people.
Yes, sir. The entire unit was wiped out. Those two are still alive. The Vector? Yes, sir. FoxDie should become activated soon. Right on schedule.
I always knew that the DIA turned out second-rate liars.
What are you talking about?
No need for denials. We know what you are, Colonel Ames.
Is rich with biological resources. Bacteria, nematodes, viruses. I'm sure we can find something here to bring that plan back into action.
Forget it. The Cleanser project was just another one of my predecessor's daydreams.
And the vocal cord parasites?
Were an excellent test case for reverse evolution. Nothing more. What matters now is the genetics technology behind that work. With genetics, the clumsiness in targeting an entire race isn't an issue. We can target specific individuals.
As the series has told us through the likes of FoxDie and nanomachines that have been perfected, is a program to target specific individuals who threaten Cyphers or the Patriot status quo.
It's strange, almost puppet-like. It could be the skulls. Damn it, they're controlling those soldiers. Be careful.
It's Liquid. Liquid's goal is to seize control of SOP, the Sons of the Patriot system that controls the soldiers. To do that, he needs to analyze the nanomachine structure and find out how they communicate with one another.
Skullface's campaign in Afghanistan demonstrates just how far he was willing to go, embracing the monster he had become to achieve his twisted goals. His use of the parasites of ethnically cleansing populations was no different from the imperialist powers he despised in order to achieve the parasite strain of English. Among his targets were local villagers, specifically the Pashto people of Afghanistan and the Mujahideen rebel forces fighting the Soviet regime, with Western support bolstering the rebels. Skullface saw them as a clear threat to his larger plans. But how did Skullface operate within such a volatile environment? By working in a symbiotic relationship with the Soviets despite their conflicting long-term goals. His actions in Afghanistan, such as the ethnic cleansing of its people, indirectly helped the Soviets sustain their occupation during the height of the Cold War. This partnership wasn't built on trust but mutual benefit. The Soviets provided resources and funding for some of his projects, specifically Huey Emmerich, but rather it was all coming from Cipher's funding, believing their support would help solidify their dominance as a nuclear power, especially against the US. The Smasi-Lamon was a fort in Afghanistan used by Cipher as a testing ground for vocal cord parasites in 1984. The infection killed practically all the Hamid fighters in the fort except for one mute survivor incapable of speaking to activate the strain that would ultimately kill him. As a result, the Soviet forces rushed in to take control of that area, as many other areas within Afghanistan. The depiction of the Honeybee missile launcher in MGS5 draws from real-world history, specifically the US's involvement in the Soviet-Afghan War. During this conflict, the CIA covertly supported the Afghan Mujahideen fighters through Operation Cyclone, one of the longest and most expensive covert operations in US history. The Mujahideen was supplied with advanced weaponry including the FIM-92 Stinger missile, portable shoulder-launched surface-to-air weapons, but of course in the world of MGS5, most of these Hamid fighters have been wiped out. The infection practically killed all the Hamid fighters in the fort except for one mute survivor, incapable of speaking to activate the very strain that killed off his village. Aside from the plague and the villages being burned down from the Scorched Earth operation, Skullface had no intentions aligning with the Soviets, instead using the Man on Fire to assist with burning down these villages. But of course, he had his hatred against the Soviets after all them years back being torn from his elders. He saw the Soviets just as bad as the English. Nothing but a bunch of imperialists try to impose their will on others.
Whatever the Navajo told you, it's just one possible solution derived by Cipher. My will is different.
As Code Talker said, their purpose is the ethnic cleansing of only those who speak a particular language. So they could do a weapon of mass destruction to eradicate specific groups, races, ethnicities, or colonies by the language they speak. Or a kind of absolute language control. Or maybe a tool for those arrogant fools to build some misguided utopia. So if the international community were to find out about them, they'd no longer be the threat they were conceived to be. In which case, their targets would be limited to minority groups as a deterrent or a terrorist tool.
In the mission Angel with Broken Wings, we see the devastating effects of MGS-5's betrayal of ethnic cleansing. While undertaking the mission for the Mujahideen during the Soviet-Afghan War, Malak's home or village was wiped out by a strain of parasites, with it being burned to the ground by the Man on Fire shortly thereafter, leaving him the sole survivor of his village. Malak then asked who tasked Snake to rescue him, but however, upon hearing his father mentioned, he reveals that he already knew that his father was dead and that his entire village had been wiped out before the Soviet Scorched Earth operation, a real-world brutal military atrocity seen throughout history.
Boss, that target you extracted, Malak, is saying that he's never heard of our client. What's more, he says his village was destroyed long before he was ever taken prisoner. Apparently it fell victim to some sort of disease, then was completely burned to the ground. Malak was out on a mission at the time, and that's the reason why he alone survived. But the question is, who hired us to find him? According to Malak, he saw strange soldiers snooping around the village when he got back. Turns out they were members of Cipher's Strike Force XOF. My theory is they wanted to get their hands on Malak to question or silence him before the Soviets could get to him. Cipher was just using us to cover things up. All that crap about Malak's relative was a front to convince us to retrieve him. But an entire colony just wiped off the map. It sounds a lot like the Hamid during the honeybee incident. All I know, boss, is there's no way in hell I'm handing Malak over to Cipher. I've decided to bring him back to Mother Base instead. He's one of us now. We told the client through a cutout that the target was killed. For some reason, though, they still paid us everything we were owed. Cipher's obviously up to something, and this is probably just another preemptive cleanup operation to them. But to Malak, he lost his village, his family, everything, and he wants his revenge. In other words, he's one of us.
The brilliance of MGS5 is its ability to showcase the horrors of war rather than glorify them, a key theme throughout the series. The Soviet Scorched Earth operation was designed to deprive the Afghan Mujahideen of resources and shelter. The Soviets systematically destroyed villages, farmland, irrigation systems and infrastructure across Afghanistan, forcing millions of civilians to flee their homes. And it's this strategy that aimed to weaken the Mujahideen support base by making it impossible for rural populations to sustain themselves or offer refuge to fighters. By targeting the countryside, for example, the Soviets hoped to suppress resistance and control the population through displacement and starvation. As widely showcased in MGS5, we see several checkpoints based all around Afghanistan.
The Soviets destroy the kishlaks, villages, wherever they can. They burn down homes and fields, fill in wells, turn pastures into minefields. It's created a mass of refugees who fled to Pakistan. If the Mujahideen are fish swimming around the villages, the Soviets will go so far as to dry out their ocean. But this has had a big price. There's bitter resentment among the Afghans, and they're taking out their anger on the soldiers on the front lines. Among the Mujahideen are the Pashtun people. They're fiercely devoted to their code of badal, or revenge. Soviets they've captured have had their hands, feet, and noses cut off before being left to die at the side of the road, just to show their comrades what they're capable of. Friendlies who come across them can do nothing but put them out of their misery. Then they burn down another village in retaliation. And the cycle of vengeance goes on.
Such tactics have been seen in history. For example, during the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937 to 1945, Imperial Japan engaged in scorched earth tactics too, systematically destroying villages and agricultural resources across China. These atrocities still continue to happen, and it's just once again a case of history repeating itself. Reiteration.
What took you so long?
Ironically, what binds all MGS5 characters together is the idea of loss. Malak's story is exactly what MGS5's themes describe. Loss, revenge, and race, losing his village and his family, driving Malak to seek revenge, leading him to join Venom Snake's forces, and widely showcasing once again the cycles of revenge, and how they often then never end, or simply change with the times.
Not the only demons in this world. Like you, vengeance is all he has. It's man's thirst for revenge that drives the times.
People aren't the ones who dictate the missions.
Then who does?
The times. People's values change over time, and so do the leaders of a country. So there's no such thing as an enemy in absolute terms. The enemies we fight are only enemies in relative terms, constantly changing with the times.
It won't be a particular country or ideology that hunts us.
Who then?
We are going to be fighting the biggest beast of all. The Times. 10 years ago, the Times rejected the boss and killed her. And now, we're the ones being tested. Will the Times erase us? Or work with us?
Of course, the Sahelanthropus was central to Skullface's plan, a marketing campaign designed to terrify the world into nuclear armament. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of his broader strategy to create chaos and force nations into a state of mutuality, assured destruction. XOF and the Soviets didn't share the same goals ultimately, but their cooperation did serve both their interest in the short term, especially with the spread of walker gears. Huey Emmerich, who also played a key role in Skullface's operation after going underground, Huey was absorbed into XOF and made chief engineer for the development of the new Metal Gear in Afghanistan. Huey believed he was working for the Soviets rather than Cipher, unaware of the larger machinations at play. The Soviets financed the Metal Gear project, likely believing it would cement their position as a dominant nuclear power, with Sahelanthropus behind them. The first upright walking bipedal weapon in existence, which had been in planning since the likes of Metal Gear Solid 3, as Granning was actually the lead designer of such project. A new kind of Metal Gear.
Metal Gear?
But I won't be used so easily. No crying myself to sleep. For you see, I'm going to send these documents to my friend in the United States.
What?
These bastards will live to regret this. And when they themselves become the targets of my creation, they will know my true greatness. Yes, Sokolov's pathetic Shagohod pales in comparison to my work. What are you going to do with a rocket engine on a tank?
About Sokolov.
A tank does not need a rocket. It needs something else. Look at these.
Nice shoes.
No. Legs. Legs that allow it to go anywhere. Just as when humans learn to walk upright. That is the real revolution in weaponry, don't you agree?
But with some D-Walkers already active and deployed for the Soviets, would later become an open Pandora's box of wider issues in Africa. Sometime before the early 1980s and before the heroic efforts of Diamond Dogs to thwart him, Skullface uncovered a man known as Code Talker, a Dene elder who discovered a species of parasites from the remains of the End and other members of the Cobra unit from Metal Gear Solid 3.
I have waited long for this day.
We will fight with you once more. Welcome back, boss.
These parasites were extraordinary. Certain strains, if the horse's body accepted them, could bestow mysterious abilities, and in fact would also be what kept Skullface alive, considering he should have been dead.
He first underwent parasite therapy before the Soviet Union became his home. His body was horribly burned. Fire washed across his thin young frame and stole his skin and his throat, even his lungs. Only through repeated therapies could the parasites keep him alive. Most of his life became something the parasites gave to him.
And then he lost the ability to die.
That is correct.
Recognizing their potential, Skullface utilized these parasites, augmented by additional technology to enhance numerous XOF operatives, creating the Parasite unit, also referred to as the Skulls. These operatives exhibited super soldier-like abilities, including the ability to emit gases or pheromones reminiscent of the Pain's abilities to attract hornets to his subjects. These pheromones zombified others, turning them into puppet soldiers under their control. Why would Skullface pursue such a monstrous and experimental project? Because, well, Metal Gear. The world of MGS5 shows us the evolution of war and the horrors of scientific experimentation, where, once again, progress is often as terrifying as it is inevitable.
Boss, watch out. It's the Skulls. Don't let them find us.
What happened to the Hamid?
Exactly. Whole squads of hardened Mujahideen killed without a fight, and no trace of BC weaponry. What does it all mean?
That's what we're here to find out.
Yeah, right.
The use of parasite technology hints at the eventual rise of nanomachine technology later in the series. If the puppet soldiers or the Skulls feel eerily familiar, it's because we see a phenomena in Metal Gear Solid 4 in South America with the PMC group known as the Pivaru Armament, which suffered because of the effects of unstable nanomachines, which controlled their behaviour and severely damaged their frontal lobes of their brains. Their speech and emotions were impaired, just like the parasite units, leaving them incapable of feeling pain. These soldiers, like the puppets in MGS5, descended into these zombie-like states, engaging in destructive, emotionless behaviour. The perfection of Metal Gear Solid in the series is it showcases how everything usually does tie in together, and that for me is an attractive quality of what made this series so great.
Alright, we're good to go.
Skullface's movement wasn't just logistical, it symbolised his broader strategy to expand his influence, particularly as he turned his attention back to Africa. Skullface's return to Africa wasn't random. Years earlier, he had been dispatched there by Zero, and now he sought to use their continent as a testing ground for his next phase. The events in Afghanistan were just one piece of the larger puzzle, a calculated move to push the world closer to chaos whilst furthering his personal vendetta.
He mentioned something interesting. The reason why they pulled their plug on the operation in Afghanistan. He said their funding started going to Central Africa instead. Cipher is pursuing new research in Africa.
Africa? What research?
Doesn't know the details, but one thing he said does make sense. The Sahelanthropus alone isn't enough to cause an RMA. He claims that what they're doing in Africa is the missing piece. A weapon to surpass Metal Gear.
Meaning it's not just another nuke.
Well, Snake would be sort of wrong, because Africa was pivotal to Skullface's grander scheme. It's here that multiple D-walkers were distributed to private forces, not just for conventional warfare, but as potential walking nuclear weapons, cheap enough for smaller nations to acquire to stick it to the man.
Skullface used the situation in South Africa to get this ally to lend a hand. They both wanted nukes, so it was a mutually beneficial relationship.
Walker gears beyond being a ploy to bring PMCs from all over the world under Cipher's control.
Hard to believe how many of those bipedal weapons have popped up around Africa.
When did that start?
No more than 6 months ago. Didn't really hit me until I came here.
They're not supposed to be in use yet. Emmerich says they were still doing the last round of fine-tuning.
The doctor has no idea. His research has already hit the black market. Both sides of the Iron Curtain will have it by now. Even so, they're spreading much too fast. Sure, the Walker gears can operate in any terrain. Their mobility's just as good in the jungle as it is in the desert. That would come in handy in a place like Africa. They are modules that can one day be used as nuclear weapon systems. And with that in mind, the numbers are way too large. There must be another reason they're so widespread.
Like what?
It's all about needs. To small-time outfits like most of these private forces, this product is a dream come true. Hell, it goes beyond PS. This is the ultimate weapon, the forbidden fruit, for anyone with an enemy to fight and people to defend.
The nuclear deterrent.
Exactly. Sounds familiar, huh? PFs are all operating off your playbook. You created these times. But could this be the new weapon in Africa that Emmerich talked about? If it is, why is Cipher letting everyone and his brother get their hands on one? What comes next? Selling nuclear weapons in the open? Making them public property?
Why don't they give that a try? Then the next war really will be fought with sticks.
Were all part of a larger, insidious plan. Some were intended to be equipped with the English strain of the vocal cord parasites, and perhaps other languages. Their mobility made them ideal for traversing rough terrain and covering vast distances, making them perfect for spreading the parasites quickly and efficiently across the globe. Even worse, the PMCs themselves, completely unaware of the parasites they were carrying, would act as unknown couriers, spreading them further through their constant movement and involvement in conflicts. Certain walker gears were also outfitted with depleted uranium armor, similar to Metal Gear Sahelanthropus, making it a walking nuclear weapon. Selling these to factions worldwide, combined with the metallic arcade's ability to rapidly enrich uranium into weapons-grade material, meant Skullface was introducing a whole new method of nuclear proliferation, ones that he could control at will anywhere in the world.
You said that the nukes Skullface was trying to spread around the world were equipped with a failsafe. Something that could shut them down at will. His will.
Quite so. After all, he needed a guarantee that a buyer wouldn't simply turn the weapons back on him.
So how can they be stopped?
The criticality trigger, that is, the detonator, is a complete black box design. Any attempt to dismantle it causes it to melt in seconds, using the corroding archaea. The design ensures that no detonation is possible unless he disengages the lock.
So he had a way to disengage it remotely?
Precisely. The client simply presses a button. At that moment, the detonator begins transmission with a surveillance satellite. The satellite reports to him how the client is trying to use the nuke. If he does not object, the lock is disengaged.
But if it's a risk to him in any way...
The detonator melts down. The same is true if detonation does not occur within a preset time after the lock is disengaged. The nuke is rendered useless.
The very atmosphere of nukes, anywhere and everywhere,
deterrence on all sides.
So that's why he ran a non-detonation test.
Yes. Another metallic archaea instantly overrides the criticality generator. The fail-safe only he controls. Any such weapon can be deactivated whenever he chooses, regardless of who owns it or their intent to use it.
Nukes. Controlled by a man, not a country. If they proliferate, conventional nukes lose all value. Political, military, and economic. The two superpowers become powerless.
These Walker Gears turned nuclear weapons into something smaller, more portable, and more accessible than traditional nukes. Sort of like the Fat Boy from the likes of the game Fallout. Or something more closer to home to you Metal Gear Solid 3 fans, the likes of the Davy Crockett. If you guys remember, that shit packed a punch.
Remember the Alamo.
Remember the Alamo.
They are madmen who would do anything to cover up the truth.
They certainly seem to like tossing their problems in the fire.
As a boy, Skullface's life went up in flames. Perhaps that is what fuels his fixation with fire.
Major, I'm burning up!
Throughout history, it's clear that conquest and the imposition of new languages were tools of imperialism. Empires rose and fell by imposing their culture and identity on those they conquered, forcing their language, beliefs, and ways of life onto native populations. The Romans did it, the Spanish did it, and hell, the British did it. And with every invasion came an erasure, or what once was, leaving a scar on the collective memory of the oppressed. But that was before the advent of nuclear weapons. When the atom bomb was developed, everything changed. Wars didn't just have consequences anymore. They had stakes so high that the idea of an outright conquest became almost unthinkable. The fear wasn't just about who would win, it was about who would survive. Nukes became the ultimate deterrent, a twisted form of balance, a form of being able to stop imperial invasion. And this is where Metal Gear Solid 5 ties in beautifully. Skullface's twisted dream was to create a world where no nation could impose its will on another. But beyond Skullface's madness, the game subtly explores how nuclear deterrence works on a global scale. In MGS5, even the smallest countries, nations, that historically would have been vulnerable to conquest or cultural eradication could level the playing field with a single nuclear warhead. A tiny nation with a small arsenal suddenly became untouchable. Who would dare invade or impose their culture knowing they'd be met with total annihilation, similar to how concepts work today? This isn't just a philosophical question, it's backed by history. Take the Cold War as an example. The US and the Soviet Union didn't dare to engage in direct combat because of mutually assured destruction. Their proxy wars avoided direct nuclear escalation because even the smallest misstep could mean the end of both nations. On a smaller scale, nuclear weapons may have prevented imperialist tendencies in the modern world. When was the last time a superpower successfully colonized another nation? Ask yourself that question. The risk of retaliation, even from smaller countries with nuclear capabilities, outweighs the potential gain. This doesn't mean violence or oppression have disappeared, far from it, but outright conquest and ethnic cleansing on a global scale, or language erasure like we have seen throughout history. Those are much harder to justify when the stakes are often existential. What's brilliant about Metal Gear is how it doesn't shy away from the uncomfortable truths about these dynamics.
They say nuclear weapons are the reason we haven't seen conflict on a global scale since World War II. The thought that your opponent might launch nukes against you sort of makes it tough to start an armed conflict, especially now that they've got intercontinental ballistic missiles. Nowhere is safe.
Of course, all that has caused military expenditures to skyrocket.
Well, the only way to ward off a preemptive strike is to flaunt your own nuclear stockpile. And that's caused their numbers to increase exponentially, not just with regards to destructive power, but in terms of targeting technology too. Now they can hit a target halfway across the world with pinpoint accuracy. In a way, the space race was a demonstration of that technological progress.
And as a result of all that, we now have mutually assured destruction.
It's the ultimate form of deterrence.
If the world finds out about Sahelanthropus, Skullface will have won. His plans won't become reality. He won't even need to use nukes. That means mere existence would be enough to enslave humanity to the fear of nuclear Armageddon. It would tear the world apart.
Hideo Kojima is often cited as a pioneer and innovator, bringing storytelling to a cinematic level through playable media. His work doesn't just tell a story, it draws the player in, making them feel like they're a part of the narrative itself. This is especially true in Metal Gear Solid 5, where its relationship with Africa and the broader themes across the series explore controversial, real-world topics through deeply immersive world building. Take Africa, for example, a region exploited for generations due to its rich landscapes, resources, and in many cases, its military utility by powerful nations. This theme runs deep in MGS5, where Cipher's exploitation of Africa mirrors the very resource-driven imperialism the region has faced historically. Ironically, even Diamond Dogs with their well-meaning goals fall into the same pattern of using war to achieve their ends, highlighting that war truly does turn men into demons.
Things have changed, boss. We pull in money, recruits, just to combat Cipher. Rubbing our noses in bloody battlefield dirt. All for revenge. The world calls for wet work, and we answer. No greater good. No just cause. Cause. Cipher sent us to hell. But we're going even deeper.
I know. I'm already a demon. Heaven's not my kind of place anyway.
One of the most significant examples is the Melinda oil field, located near the Malene River. On the surface, it's just an oil facility, but in reality, it's part of Cipher's larger scheme. The oil field had 3 chimneys connected to systems that burned impurities from the oil wells, producing thick smoke that mixed with sulfides due to poor ventilation. This resulted in acid rain, polluting the environment and affecting local populations. Senar, the company behind the oil field, was nothing more than a shell corporation, a front for Cipher's real objective.
It's a shell corporation, meaning someone is just using Sanar's name from the shadows. But what about those strange corpses? Just what the hell were they doing over there?
The oil field wasn't just about profit, it was a strategic cover for a very darker plan. Cipher deliberately polluted the river with oil to prevent villagers downstream from drinking the water, effectively halting the spread of infection through contaminated water supplies. But when venom snakes sabotaged the oil field in 1984, the oil was no longer there to stop the villagers from accessing the water. The unintended consequence? The parasite spread downstream, wiping out Massa Village. This chain of events paints a grim picture. By trying to do the right thing, Venom Snake inadvertently caused an entire village to be infected by the larval form of the parasites, left in the lungs of Cipher's victims. The villagers, desperate for clean water, drank from the river and paid the ultimate price. Children, however, weren't spared, not because they were immune to tragedy, but because the vocal cord parasites don't mature in prepubescent bodies. Here's the part that raises questions. Why don't we see the aftermath of Master Village? We're told the adults died like flies, yet we never see the bodies. If we compare this to other villages that were infected, those who were burned to the ground to stop the spread of the parasites. Of course, some were waterlogged, which meant the larvae was still infecting others who were drinking the water. But Master Village wasn't napalmed. The question is, why? Chances are maybe in an earlier version of the game it was meant to be. Maybe we were supposed to see a burned down Master Village and learn that it was our fault. This ties directly to the missing Chapter 3 mission Kingdom of the Flies. In this cut content, Liquid Snake and a band of child soldiers hijack Sahelanthropus and escape, taking with them the missing vial of the parasite strain that Psycho Mantis had stolen. The vial was supposedly destroyed when tossed in the fire, but events suggest otherwise. The strain had been released and Liquid, having matured, was now infected. This would have put all of the diamond dogs at risk of infection, leaving them with no choice but to napalm the village to prevent the epidemic from spreading.
Code Red, we need to go fast. How's it going over there?
There's nothing you can do for him now.
Island's completely contaminated. Orders are to use napalm to sanitize.
Sanitize every square inch. Prepare to drop. We're pulling out. Move! Code Red.
Interestingly, if you go back to the 2014 E3 trailer, you'll notice what looks like Master Village or a settlement just on the outside. The remnants of burnt structures and charred bodies, reinforcing the theory that diamond dogs may have had to destroy it because of the drinking water containing parasite larvae. However, the game itself doesn't make it clear whenever it was them or Cipher who carried out this act.
That used to be a settlement, but now it's burned to the ground.
It appears what we see on the E3 2014 trailer was cut content which directly ties into this settlement you kinda find just outside of the oil field. Instead of a cutscene, Ocelot just makes a comment, but it's a definitive link as you can clearly even see the vulture that was feasting on the corpses in the burned rubble. It's unclear how this scene would have played out, but clearly it would have affected Venom Snake greatly as he is seen in complete despair, screaming into the sky, going nuclear. The song for the trailer was performed by Mike Oldfield, titled Nuclear. Once you understand the lyrics, it's really telling of the disastrous effects of ethnic cleansing. And maybe it was removed by Konami because its themes were far too sensitive to show. But when you read the lyrics, it makes total sense.
Why the burned bodies?
Skullface stands as one of the most complex and horrifyingly underrated antagonists in the Metal Gear series. Convince me otherwise. I mean, this guy has done some messed up things. He's not just a man seeking revenge, but he's literally a parasite himself, feeding on the suffering of others to perfect his vision of liberation. His ultimate goal, or so he claims, is to free the world from Zero's language of control, to eradicate oppression by empowering the oppressed to reclaim their past, present, and future.
All men will breathe free again, reclaim their past, present, and future. This is no ethnic cleanser. It is a liberator. To free the world from Zero. Let the world be.
The irony is, by attempting to let the world be, Skullface becomes yet another tyrant enforcing his will, a distorted version of the boss's philosophy. The Devil's House, one of the game's most haunting locations, embodies Skullface's experiments. The facility itself is where the vocal cord parasites are engineered to target specific languages that render nuclear weapons obsolete. Aside from all the grim scenery, what is more peculiar is the headphones that are lodged into the throats of the patients, along with different languages that are playing through the radios. All languages, but English. The devils are in the details.
Like you reported, we've detected virtually every major language there is. French, German, Italian, Spanish, including South American accents. Then there's Russian, Hindi, Arabic, Portuguese, Mandarin, Cantonese, Japanese.
They're nothing if not thorough.
Well, I don't know if we've got them all covered. Ignoring the ones that have gone extinct, supposedly over 5,000 languages exist today. Besides, English isn't one of the ones we picked up.
Really? English?
I know. Only 5% of the world's population is a native English speaker. But when you factor in those who've acquired it as a second language, nearly 1/3 of the people speak it. The world's dominant lingua franca.
Doesn't feel like this is over. And I'll never be whole again.
Since the dawn of time, communication has been the cornerstone of survival and connection for all living things. For early humans, it likely began with simple gestures and sounds, akin to what we observe in chimpanzees today if we were looking at it through a scientific lens. These primitive signals gradually evolved as hunter-gatherers needed to warn off predators and share the location of resources. Clearer communication meant better survival, and as groups grew larger, so did the complexity of language. This progression allowed us as people to form relationships and tribalistic forms, share stories, and eventually forge cultures. And echoes of Kojima's exploration of human connection in Death Stranding showcases that, I think. The game presents a poignant metaphor of communication, the living and the dead connected through strands, bridging divides that seem insurmountable. Kojima often reflects on humanity's dependence on communication as a lifeline, drawing parallels to our instincts to need to connect across all time. Communication isn't just unique to humans. Nature is full of examples. Whales sing across oceans to attract mates. Fireflies glow to capture attention, and ants leave chemical pheromone trails to guide their colonies. Each species' methods underline a universal truth, a connection that is vital for survival. One that binds us together, how we communicate with the environment, coexist with other species, and even communicate with them like our pets, dogs or cats. Even parrots are the group of language-learning animals with the physiology to produce the same sounds that are used in the human language. While they don't have a larynx at the top of their trachea, like humans, parrots have a similar structure called the sphinx, which is located at the bottom of the trachea in their chest. There's plenty of examples of what unifies us, but also can destroy us at the same time.
Hello? This sucks.
In MGS5, this concept is mirrored in how characters like Venom Snake form bonds through shared experiences despite language or cultural differences. Diamond Dogs operate like a super organism. Each individual contributes to the group's survival, creating a system greater than its sum of parts. Race, gender, culture, none of that matters. What unites them is a shared ideology, a singular purpose.
All of you. Until now, I had thought of your organization, Diamond Dogs, as a superorganism.
You'll have to explain that one.
The term refers to a unit of eusocial insects like ants or bees. While made up of many individuals, they behave as though they are one organism, with the queen as their nerve center. The close ties you share here reminded me of that. You come from all walks of life, do you not? Many races and tongues, talents and pasts, complementing each other, influencing each other, making Diamond Dogs the unique group that it is. If our world were a human body, you would be parasites. You make a living by doing the dirty work that the world powers cannot handle themselves. From their perspective, you are likely a nuisance. But without you, pus would build up around the world, and autotoxemia, self-poisoning, would follow. The world needs your kind.
The game's uses of cassette tapes are a narrative tool, even feels like a reflection of how humanity preserves its stories and knowledge, much like oral traditions of the past, such as ancient drawings.
Human memories, ideas, culture, history.
Genes don't contain any record of human history.
Is it something that should not be passed on? Should that information be left at the mercy of nature?
We've always kept records of our lives. Through words, pictures, symbols, from tablets to books.
Our vocal cords and ever-advancing brains allowed for the formation of complex sounds and symbols. With these tools gave rise to over 5,000 languages, though not all have stood the test of time. Over 570 languages are now extinct, their words and stories lost to war, societal shifts, or neglect, or simply just the times. Kojima subtly shows this with his themes in MGS3, Naked Snake, or rather Big Boss. His mission tied to ideologies that clash, evolve, and seem to crumble over time over political matters. Language becomes both a weapon and a bridge, a tool to deceive and unite. And the future of communication is an open question. Perhaps, as Kojima often suggests in his speculative storytelling, humans may one day transcend spoken words altogether. Telepathic connection or advanced technologies may make traditional language obsolete, ushering in new ways to understand one another, perhaps telepathically speaking through our minds.
I will show you my psychokinetic power. Put your controller on the floor. Put it down as flat as you can. That's good.
I think if by now if you don't know that Metal Gear Solid is like one big life lesson, then you haven't played the game enough. It teaches us that communication is effective in many ways, and then in fact that we need to preserve it. By preserving our language means preserving our cultures, our ways of life, and respecting the will of others.
Boss, you were right. It's not about changing the world. It's about doing our best to leave the world the way it is. It's about respecting the will of others and believing in your own.
Shabani, your boy sent me.
Exploitation of the vulnerable happens all around the world, even adolescents. Take Shabani for instance. As the eldest of the child miners, his voice matured first, making him an ideal candidate for experimentation. He, along with the other adults, was moved to Ngumba Industrial Zone, the Devil's House, for testing. It's also worth noting that Skullface himself is infected with multiple strains of the vocal cord parasites, though not the English strain. These parasites cost him his ability to speak his native tongue, Hungarian, and in many ways they have transformed him into something akin to the Walking Dead, a host kept alive by the parasites themselves. As parasites usually function, is to live on one's host. You could say that Skullface is just nothing more than a vessel. Snake is called back to Mother Base when a strange infection breaks out, the vocal cord parasites. The quarantine platform becomes a grim necessity, showcasing the fear and chaos that the biological warfare can bring onto the audience. And biological warfare is definitely not a new concept. Consider the British forces allegedly using smallpox-contaminated blankets against Native Americans during the colonial era, or the Mongols catapulting plague-infected corpses during the siege of Cipher. Japan's infamous Unit 731 during World War II took it even further, using prisoners for horrifying experiments with diseases like anthrax and plague. The parallels between the real-world events and the Metal Gear series are obviously uncanny. The Kokongo parasite infection on Mother Base ties directly into these themes. Kotoka, the Navajo biologist who refers to the parasite as his children, becomes pivotal in halting the infection. His discovery that Wolbachia bacteria could feminize the parasites, preventing reproduction, It's a stroke of brilliance, but it comes at a cost, rendering host infertile. What's fascinating is how the children rescued from the mines and war-torn villages actually became the carriers of the infection. It was no one's fault. The parasite's targets mature vocal cords, so the children acted as unknowing vessels for the disease.
When the symptoms first appeared, we checked and disinfected all equipment used up to that point. Any and all prisoners, soldiers, materials, and animals extracted during missions were also quarantined.
So, that just leaves.
I have seen children around here. Where are they from?
All over. Some were being held hostage at a mine. Then there were the troublemakers at Yamasa.
Yamasa?
Yeah.
Their clothes, their things. Did you burn them?
They're just kids. We couldn't. And besides, not one of them's shown symptoms.
The parasites don't infect prepubescent hosts. Their vocal cords are not fully developed.
Well, if infection doesn't occur in children...
It is possible they carried eggs on their clothes, and the infection spread from them.
Check the kid's stuff.
Snake's destruction of Melinda oil field inadvertently caused the Kikongo infection to spread, as the polluted water Skullface had engineered to contain the parasites was no longer tainted. Villages downstream had to drink the water, and the infection just spread like wildfire.
And judging from this casualty list, it is the Kikongo strain, meaning a breed of parasite that triggers symptoms upon detecting pronunciation specific to Kikongo.
So how do we keep them from becoming symptomatic?
Use this. A type of Wolbachia, introduced to a sample of the parasite. The parasitic bacteria that colonizes the parasites, turning male to female and preventing copulation. You must cultivate more.
Thanks to Code Talker, we've managed to put a stop to any new vocal cord parasite infections. We couldn't save those already symptomatic, but everyone who survived has been released from the quarantine platform.
The character Code Talker and how his story connects to some pretty heavy themes in MGS5 can easily go overlooked. The term Code Talker originally comes from the United States Marine Corps during World War I and World War II. It was used to describe Native American soldiers who used their native language to send messages that the enemy couldn't crack. The first group, the Choctaw Telephone Squad, did this in World War I, but it was the Navajo Code Talkers in World War II who made their mark, developing a code that the Japanese never managed to break.
There's something I've been wondering. Why are you called Code Talker? During World War II, the U.S. military used the languages of different tribes, including the Navajo, as codes, right? I know the term Code Talker was used to mean people sent to the battlefield to speak in those codes. Were you one of them?
Our mother tongue was indeed used for war. But I did not go. I was already over the conscription age. However, I was made to help craft the codes that were spoken. So in a wider sense, you could call me a code talker for that. Navajo is a complex language, and virtually no one outside the US speaks it. They must have thought it was the perfect language to use as a code.
Yeah, in the end, the Japanese never cracked it. The Cipher is king in information warfare.
The character Code Talker is a living representation of what happened to Native Americans in real life. He's a guy who was taken from his family, sent to an American Indian boarding school where he was forced to speak English and made to feel like his native language was dirty. If you spoke Navajo, you were punished, And get this, they'd make the kids eat soap if they spoke their native tongue. That's what Code Talker had to live through.
The story goes back to the 19th century, to my earliest memory. One day, a man from the government visited our Hogan, our home. I cried as he yanked me from my mother's arms and took me away to an Indian boarding school. From that day forward, I became George. This was the name my teacher gave me. I was forced to give up my Diné name, forbidden from speaking anything but English. If we dared utter a word of filthy Navajo, the teacher made us eat a bar of soap.
Yeah, that was the U.S. government's education policy for Native Americans.
To erase our words was like erasing our people. Their education was tantamount to ethnic cleansing. Over time, the overt persecution of our language stopped, but to this day, it continues to be eaten away by the lingua franca, that is English. Many of the Diné outside the reservations can speak nothing else, and it isn't just our language. Across the world, minority languages are being destroyed by dominant languages.
As mentioned in the latter, the MGS series touches up on these topics of the atrocities of wars and how the oppressors oppress, the means to instill by fear or by information control. And characters like Raiden strike a striking resemblance with characters like Code Talker, especially in his childhood.
We were fed once a day. I can still taste the gunpowder they mixed into the food.
Gunpowder? In the food?
The gunpowder had toluene in it, giving it hallucinogenic properties. It kept us drugged, controllable.
Oh my God!
When the Civil War ended, those of us who survived were taken in by NGOs. They gave me a new life in the States. I can't complain.
Civilizations throughout the years and conquerors have become to resent their neighbours because of these conquests that cause these deep-seated hatreds between them. And that was the case for Code Talker. It was the language of his oppressors, English, that he become to resent. And this isn't just some random backstory, there's some real history here. Native American boarding schools were a way to strip kids of their culture, their identity, and their language. It was all about making them civilized in the eyes of the US government, forcing them to forget who they were, and changing them into something else that aligned with their principles. In 1838, there was something known as the Trail of Tears, when Native Americans were forcibly relocated, losing their lands, their homes, their families. It's a tragic part of history, and it's reflected in Code Talker's life. Code Talker stands out because he reflects how two sides of the same coin. Unlike Skullface, who's driven by pure hatred, Code Talker sees things a little differently. He doesn't blame the world for everything that happened to him by regimes. The parasites themselves really are not actually the real enemy. These things that came from ancient times and gave humans the ability to speak, according to the Metal Gear universe, he understands the dangers they do pose. But his view is that the parasites, not people, that should be dealt with. And that with great power comes great responsibility, and if used right, the parasites could be beneficial.
Advanced communication was possible. This was the birth of language. Luckily for man, it was around this time that a particular retrovirus was circulating. While not lethal, it infected not only man, but the vocal cord parasites as well. It is presumed that this virus removed part of the parasite's DNA and reverse transcribed it into man's reproductive cells. It was a vector. Among the genes it transcribed were the ones responsible for the production of language. The vocal cord parasite's vocalization genes were written into the human genome. The parasites were no longer of any use to man now. Man could use his voice as he pleased, when he pleased, hindering the parasite's courtship vocalizations. Having lost their opportunity to reproduce, the parasites died out, leaving behind only the transcribed genes. The vocal cord parasites were once in symbiosis with man. Its genes even became a part of his. Humans and parasites are extremely close. As such, it will be extremely difficult for man's immune system to eliminate the vocal cord parasites. Even cutting them out will be no simple matter, which is exactly why these ethnic cleansing parasites are such a formidable weapon.
But that's in stark contrast to Skullface, who wants to use some sort of language control by controlling cultures, man's tongues, and essentially having it under his will. Core Talker wants to find a solution. He doesn't want to tear the world apart. He just wants to stop these parasites before they destroy humanity.
It was Skullface who put it back into operation. But despite that, he told me to forget about the transmission route and just focus on language identification. I do not know why. I understand that the Chinese philosophers who discovered the relative species of parasite originally planned to develop a phonogrammic alexia parasite. The left temporal parietal region is home to the part of the brain that identifies the phonetic symbols of the English language. They wished to create a strain that would parasitize that region and suppress its literacy functions. The brain area responsible for identifying the logographs of Chinese, meanwhile, is in the left middle frontal gyrus, meaning that even if native speakers of Chinese were infected with the parasite, the literacy would be unaffected. Old and new, east and west, there is no limit to the delusions of those in power. But this delusion threatens to become a reality. I have to do something to stop this. There must be something I can do.
And speaking of the parasites, let's dive into the science a bit more. Core Talker is actually a biologist, and he was the one who performed the autopsy on The End from Metal Gear 3. He discovered that The End and the Pain were two of the most powerful of the boss's soldiers in the Cobra unit were actually infected by these primeval parasites, which had infected their vocal cords.
Code Talker, haven't seen you eat a single thing since you got here. Let me guess. Photosynthesis?
Oh? What makes you say that?
Well, a long time ago, I knew someone with a similar ability.
Well, you are correct.
I know it's hard to believe, but the End is apparently capable of photosynthesis. He's probably got an edge over you in terms of stamina.
Ready for some more?
Most of my body is covered with parasites. I supply them with water, and in return I receive sugars they produce when exposed to light. It isn't just my skin either. The parasites also act as my eyes. They have replaced many of my internal organs as well. It is thanks to them that I live on after over a century.
How did you obtain them anyway?
I've been wandering for more than a century, and now my journey comes to a close.
Yeah, I've heard that before. Go on.
Half in doubt, I visited them to discover the body of an old man. Well, to be precise, his partial remains. A collection of parts, you could say. The man had died in an explosion.
An old man, you say?
His flesh had not decomposed. In fact, the tissue's cells were still metabolizing. The parasite had infected, or should I say assimilated with, the tissues, and was keeping them alive. I became obsessed with studying the body parts, and so I made a decision. To truly know the parasites, I had to live with them.
So, you implanted them inside you from the dead man's flesh?
Correct. It was quite a gamble, whether or not they would adapt to me. But fortunately, it appears I was compatible with them. Or perhaps, through my many years of research, my immune system learned to tolerate them. Would you care to join me? A life spent never worrying about food is a most wonderful one.
I think I'll pass.
This is where things get crazy. Code Talker injected himself with the same parasite from the end to see what would happen. And he started photosynthesizing, just like the end would do. Yeah, you heard right. He no longer needed food to survive, he could just absorb sunlight, or just as quiet, could absorb water in order to survive. The concepts of their functionalities align the same. Skullface's plan is just straight up flawed. He wants to take out the English language, the language of oppression, and replace it with something pure. But in doing so, he just creates more destruction. Code Talker, on the other hand, understands that language itself isn't the problem, and it's neither the parasites. It's the things that manipulates us, that divides us, that controls us. He's not trying to rewrite the world, he's trying to fix what's broken, and what makes him such a tragic character. He has the knowledge to solve the problem, but he's caught in the middle of war he didn't even start. Quite a lot of biblical themes are referenced in the MGS series. For example, in the Old Testament, humanity's abilities to speak is what ties into the Tower of Babel. You've probably heard of the story where humanity was united with one language and tried to build a tower to reach the heavens. In doing so meant disobeying God, and he did not approve of such actions. So he confused their language, scattered them across the earth, and created the divisions we still see today. Because man had too much power and intelligence and not enough wisdom to use it constructively.
In the Old Testament, it is written that only one language was spoken in Eden. A shared tongue that united all of humanity. Mankind eventually grew aware of its power and harnessed that strength to build a tower to the heavens. The mighty Tower of Babel. This angered God, who splintered the language of man, and the tower was never completed. Languages emerged, and the earth was divided as men went their separate ways. Every age is the same. A ruler's first order of business, after conquering new land, is to force his tongue on its people. Ancient Rome, Napoleon, and now Zero. English is wreaking havoc around the world right now. The British Empire tilled the land with war as its hoe, then began planting the seed that is English. Eventually, American capitalism became the new instrument. To play its game of wealth, you only had to abide by one rule: English.
The connection with the Tower of Babel, Code Talker explains that basically every era follows the same pattern. Conquerors impose their language as tools of control, and he draws a direct line to Zero's vision, showing how English has become a weapon of dominance. How different colonies throughout the years, aside from the British Empire, which have spread their means of influence, particularly English across its colonies, planting the seeds of global influence. Then later American capitalism took over as the new driving force, spreading English even further and shaping countless countries that are becoming marginally westernized. A true lingua franca, where different people from different countries speak English as their secondary language.
Only 5% of the world's population is a native English speaker. But when you factor in those who've acquired it as a second language, nearly 1/3 of the people speak it. The world's dominant lingua franca.
America is known as a land of liberty, the beacon of freedom, the promised land, or the American dream, a place where people from every corner of the world came seeking opportunity, a fresh start, and a life unshackled by oppression. But beneath the glossy veneer of freedom for all lies a darker truth, a reality where the dream often turns into a dystopian nightmare. Immigrants built the nation alongside its native people, creating a melting pot of cultural beliefs and identities. Yet, instead of harmony, the cracks have deepened. Diversity became a battleground, not a bridge. War is painted as peace, as Orwell describes. Liberty reduced to an illusion, as the Statue of Liberty shines like a beacon over its people. And equality remains a promise unfulfilled. The American dream sold unity, but the reality is a relentless struggle where differences are weaponized and division fuels chaos. Is America truly a symbol of freedom, or is it a monument of the illusion of it? A land where the pursuit of oneness is overshadowed by a history that is messy, of conflict, cultural defamation, and democracy just being a filler for textbooks. The ripe apple of America is very rotten at its core, when you recognise its sad history. The truth is, without free will, there is no difference between submission and rebellion. Languages shape the way we perceive and interact with the world in profound ways. Psychologist Daniel Casasanto notes that the way language package information can influence our attention, memory, and even how we interpret experiences. For example, languages and distinct grammatical structures can subtly direct us to focus on different aspects of reality, altering what we remember. The metaphors we can use also shift our thought patterns, strengthening some associations while weakening others. Casasanto even highlights the transformative power of language that include exact numerical concepts compared to those that don't, describing their impact on thought as dramatic and far-reaching. Yet, when a second language takes over, it can drown out a person's native tongue, leaving deep scars. Losing your first language doesn't just erase words, it disconnects you from your roots, your culture, and even the world you once knew. Linguist Julie Sedvi describes this loss as being unmoored from your own life and the cultural framework that defines you. English, with its global dominance, often plays this role. As The Guardian puts it, English is unavoidable, leaving behind a path of cultural destruction. Dialects fade, languages are abandoned, and entire literacy traditions are distorted. Memorist Eva Hoffman, who moved from Poland to Canada, described the alienation she felt from her native language. She called it a radical disjointing between words and the world they describe, a loss so profound it drained existence of its meaning, its texture, and its life. And that isn't just for language, that can also be for accents too. As a kid growing up and moving to a different part of the country of England, my accent was often criticised because it was different to the other kids. With this being my own personal reality, I started to understand that over time I changed with the place I was living in, that my accent became different and more southern. Despite these harsh realities of the world, not everyone sees English as the villain Skullface brands it as an infestation. Author Scott Montgomery offers a more nuanced perspective, because he acknowledges the challenges and the losses brought by the spread of English, but warns against oversimplifying the issue. English, he argues, represents something deeper, humanity's age-old dream of a universal language, the Tower of Babel, a tool to bridge divides and bring people together. Whilst it leaves wounds in its wakes, it also carries the hope of connection, collaboration, and understanding a fragile but enduring aspiration for a better word. It's a language that's become universally beneficial for everybody, one that we all share together. It's ours, and we can communicate our cultures through it.
Words can't kill. I was invaded by words, burrowing and breeding inside me. A philosopher once said, "It is no nation we inhabit, but a language." Make no mistake, our native tongue is our true fatherland.
Emil Choran's quotation fits in with MGS5 like a glove. He's experienced the devastating consequences of losing one's linguistic identity. Both Skullface and himself hail from Romania, a region, as we've touched on, subjugated to foreign domination and cultural suppression. Skullface's native tongue, alongside his personal identity, was eroded by forces, mirroring Romania's history of occupation, first by Hungary, then later by Nazi Germany, and then Soviet Union. Chiran, a philosophical pessimist born into this turbulent context, also navigated the imposition of foreign languages. His move from writing in Romanian to French, a lingua franca shaped by Europe's historical dynamics. For what it's worth, I thought I'd point out that both figures, one historical and the other fictional, embody a shared struggle, the hatred born from having one's voice and culture overshadowed through Skullface. Kojima channels Chiran's philosophical pessimism and linguistic alienation, and by using these parallels to explore the devastating impact of linguistic dominance on personal and cultural identity.
はい、皆さんこんにちは、小島秀夫です。今僕はですね、クライテリオンさんのとこにいます。はい、もう天国みたいなとこですね。で、今サブスクの時代なんですけども。
Hideo Kojima, ever the director and storyteller, often feels more like a philosopher. To truly understand his work is to see beyond the surface claims of him being a predictor of the future. Instead, Kojima's brilliance lies in his deep understanding of global dynamics, shaped by monumental events during his formative years. This perspective has given him uncanny wisdom and creative insight. He's a man who absorbs inspiration like a sponge. If he doesn't have time to read a book, he'll watch a film daily, pulling ideas from every frame. But Kojima's methods aren't so different from the rest of us. Like anyone, he evolves by learning, adapting, and blending new ideas with his own imaginative twists. Through media, entertainment, and music, our cultures expand and adapt. The internet and the digital age have accelerated this process, bringing us closer than ever. Technology has allowed seamless communication, enabling us to see and understand people from across the globe in ways that were unimaginable just decades ago. Personally, I try to see life as a balance, acknowledging both positives and negatives. It's kind of a perspectivism, not to dismiss past mistakes, but to understand how they shape the world into what it is today, offering a more livable experience. The gaming industry is a perfect example of these interconnectedness, a form of communication that often transcends language. Games like Ico and Journey are masterclasses in visual cues and musical tones and gestures to communicate. Players meet and interact with others in these games, but words are replaced by shared emotional experiences, conveyed through movement and sound. Similarly, we play online with people from all over the world, connecting through shared human commonalities. Kojima Productions exemplifies this collaborative spirit, with team members from diverse cultures and backgrounds. It's this melting pot of ideas that likely contributes to their ability to craft such groundbreaking and emotional, resonant media.
Fucking beach. There's no repatriation here, no. One of us dies, that's it. He goes to the other side. It's nice, huh? Lucky loser gets to put an end to this rinse and repeat bullshit once and for all. So, no BTs, no void outs, no bullshit. Just a good old-fashioned boss fight.
I recently came across an interesting article that ties into these themes. While I don't fully agree with all of its sentiments, it does make a valid point about cultural shifts and the global spread of the English language. The writer speculates that Kojima expressed his own frustrations with these changes through Skullface in MGS5. They describe how a translator living in Korea, the language invasion in the game resonated deeply. They see English as inescapable, dominating signage, culture, and even casual communication. This dominance leads to the gradual erosion of smaller languages, similar to what happened during historical invasions, except today the process is subtler. No physical harm is inflicted, and the invasion often goes unnoticed, even in countries losing their linguistic identity. To illustrate, the writer describes a typical day in Korea. Walking down the street, they encounter store signs featuring as much English as Korean. Cafes are named the coffee, bean and tea leaf. Parking lots are labelled parking instead of the Korean language, and restrooms are marked with English rather than Korean language. While they personally understand both languages, they highlight how natural it's become for Koreans to navigate spaces dominated by English, a result of decades of Western influence through products, films, and cultural exports. As children grow up loving these imports, they inevitably adopt the language associated with them. The writer connects with the phenomena to Kojima's own experiences. As a child inspired by Western culture, he grew up in Japan surrounded by foreign letters and ideas. His passions for Hollywood movies shaped his creative vision, influencing Metal Gear Solid. From the American snakes to the Hollywood-style narratives, Kojima infused his games with elements familiar to a global audience. This allowed his work to reach far beyond Japan, bridging cultures in a way few creators can achieve. The writer speculates that Kojima, now in his 50s, reflects more deeply on these themes. They suggest that Skullface's frustrations might mirror Kojima's own sense of discontent with the dominance of Western culture and its impact on Asian languages. However, they're careful to point out that this isn't about the shame or regret. Kojima couldn't have achieved the success he did without drawing from Hollywood influences, and he never abandoned his Japanese roots. His work remains a blend of both worlds, providing and proving that cultural synthesis can create something truly unique. Where I diverge from this article in the notion of Kojima's supposed frustration, if Kojima resented Western culture, he wouldn't have embraced it so wholeheartedly in his creations. Instead, I think his exploration of race and language in MGS5 is one of the series' most profound themes. Kojima doesn't simply critique cultural shifts, he examines them with nuance, showing how language, power, and identity are intertwined. These are complex issues that can't be boiled down to simple frustration. They're a part of the broader story that Kojima has been telling us for decades. Cultural shifts are inevitable, and while they bring challenges, they also pave the way for innovation and understanding. Kojima's work amplifies this, blending East and West to create something that speaks to everyone, regardless of language.
I love games, I love this world. I really love you all from my heart. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much.
I wanted to express my feelings to you. If only we shared a common tongue.
But the words we shared... No, that was no language at all.
Hey, Uncle Hal, can I give him the Mark III?
Huh?
He's kinda a new friend. He lives near here. We can't understand each other's language, but we're having fun. He's my very first outside friend.
Really? That's great.
So with all of that said, I just want to extend my deepest thanks to all of you for your unwavering support. No matter where you come from, we share a common bond, a universal connection that transcends language and race. While words have the power to harm, it's their impact and the meaning behind them that truly matter. I've been your host, the Voice Box, and until we meet again.
Is there such a thing as an absolute timeless enemy? There is no such thing, and never has been. And the reason is that our enemies are human beings like us. They can only be our enemies in relative terms. The world must be made whole again.